Pariah.
Occasionally I have times where I just kind of reconnect with like why I climb and why I fell in love with the sport, where it's just, I'm just out with a friend having a wonderful time.
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Struggle. It's me, Ryan. I am so happy you are here today because we've got a legend on the show. A true legend. I talked to a lot of great climbers on this show, and I'm incredibly grateful for the conversations that I've had. But there is a short list of climbers that I've talked to who have tectonically shifted the way this sport has evolved for us who climb today and who love it. Lynn Hill comes to mind, and Alan Watts comes to mind, today's guest. And holy smokes, was this a delightful conversation, which sprang from me having one of the most memorable days out on rock in my life as a climber out at Smith Rock, my first trip to Smith. Alan reached out and said, hey, you're coming to Smith. I'd love to show you around, which is just like the craziest email to get. And boy, did he show me around. This was just on the heels of my Portland trip where I was out there filming with Emil Abrahamson. And so Emil and his partner Cordy came along with my friends Johan and April, who are hosting us in Portland. And Alan friggin' Watts met us out there and took us around. I dive into a couple of those stories here in this conversation with Alan. There's a funny one where he kind of inadvertently hazed me on my first Smith climb. And then just one of the most beautiful and memorable days I've ever had on rock was swinging leads with Alan on a multi-pitch that we did. Now, let me just hit a couple of the highlights of Alan's impact. I mean, it could take me 2 hours to do an intro to really cover what he's meant to this sport. But as a climber in his day, coming up in the 70s and the 80s, he was one of the strongest climbers in the world. He went out and did all the test pieces in Yosemite and internationally. And if we just stopped there, this would be a great conversation. But of course, Alan didn't stop there because Alan had a vision that many climbers of the day, especially climbers in the US who are deeply steeped in trad ethics, didn't see. And that was steep rock climbing faces. Faces that couldn't be protected with the traditional gear of the time. But Alan didn't let that stop him. Instead, he broke the rules and he drilled bolts. He rappelled down from the top. He wrap bolted some of the most beautiful, stunning, and classic climbs that we all get to enjoy today. At the time, it was blasphemy. The trad ethics didn't support that kind of bolting, and especially the ethic around how to work a route. Tactics that today are considered the gold standard for how to project, like hanging on a bolt and figuring out moves and doing routes in sections, projecting, if you will. And what are some of these most classic lines that Alan Watts has developed? Well, he developed the first sport climbing routes in the country, and all of those were at Smith Rock. And Smith Rock wasn't really a known destination at the time. I mean, it's on the top of many people's list for destinations now for climbing trips. And I had such an incredible time when I was there. I couldn't recommend it enough. But at the time, Alan and his crew had kind of climbed out everything that could be climbed there with traditional protection. And so everybody turned their sights to Yosemite and all of the other understandably beautiful, incredible traditional climbing areas around the country and the world. But once Alan started wrap bolting these steep faces at Smith, everything changed. So these incredible and early sport routes in the country, including Watts Tots, Churning in the Wake, Chain Reaction, which we talk quite a bit about in this conversation, and a route that I tried with Emil, by the way. Emil sent it, and I very much did not send it, with Alan standing right there. Just unbelievable for us to be there with Alan throughout this whole thing. And then, of course, to bolt or not to be the first 14A in the country and just do it, the hardest route at the time that it was put up, 14C. These are Alan Watts routes. They all have incredible and in some cases hilarious stories behind them. We dive into quite a bit of that in this conversation, but we don't just look back. And that's what I love about Alan Watts, is he is a non-traditionalist in pretty much every sense of the word. When he was putting up these sport routes, he was catching a ton of heat from the traditional climbing community. But he had this vision and he stuck with it. He wanted to move the sport forward. But even today, as we look forward, and he's still climbing a lot, he's not stuck in the routes that he's done in the past. He's working that new pink route over at the gym and he's feeling super psyched about it. He's meeting with the next generation of climbers. He's caught Adam Andra and Drew Ruana on cutting edge projects at Smith, and he continues to delight in where our sport is going. We talk about all that in this conversation. I am so, so grateful to the time that Alan gave to us here for this conversation, but more so on behalf of the climbing community for the incredible impact that this guy has had on this sport. If you have ever clipped a bolt in your life, you have Alan Watts to thank for it. Now, just a quick piece of news before we dive in with The Ledge, Mr. Watts. I just wanted to let you all know that I am going to be emceeing the International Climbers Festival out in Lander, Wyoming this July 10th through 13th. It's the oldest climbing festival in the U.S. And speaking of Alan Watts, he was the keynote speaker, I think it was last year, or maybe it was the year before. They always bring in incredible speakers, incredible athletes, and then the event itself is just jam-packed from start to finish with clinics, with the art crawl, with the kickoff party, the dyno contest, the pull-up contest. And I'm going to be there barking into the microphone the whole time, giving high fives, and probably trying my hand at the pull-up contest. I've been doing some practicing in preparation for it, and I would love to see you there. You can pop over to climbersfest.org to grab your tickets. I'll put a link right there in the show notes. That's July 10th through 13th. I'm so psyched for this entire weekend. I'd love to see you there. Hit that link, grab your tickets. All right, y'all, it's time to dive into this conversation here with a self-proclaimed cheater who became a pariah and is now a hero for all of us who clipped bolts, Mr. Alan Watts. Good to see you again. How are you?
Yeah, it's good to see you. Doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's Friday, you know, I've got the dogs sleeping at my feet right now. The house is quiet because the kids are at school. You know, all hell will break loose tomorrow, but this time is my time now, Alan. I like it.
Well, that's good. I banished my dogs to the upstairs, so they're not going to be bothering me. I have a 1-year-old pup that would just be here driving me crazy.
Oh, yeah. Well, that'll keep you busy. 1-year-old, that's a lot of energy there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's been a little bit since I've seen you. I'm so glad. I got to say, just to start things off here, that time that we spent out at Smith Rock, and you were such a gracious host showing us around and doing the multi-pitch with me. And, you know, it was such a wonderful time. It's one for the memory books for me. So thank you. I'm still glowing from it.
It was a really good weekend for me. I don't get out and climb as much as I'd like to. And I don't know, for that weekend, I felt like I was a climber, not just a tour guide. So that really worked. You know, I recall you saying that when we topped out that route. Dirty Pinkos, was that the name of it? Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, that really struck me, you know, to hear that from you, because obviously Smith Rock is like, you know, as much your crag as it is anyone's. He developed so much there. And when you started climbing there really wasn't climbing there. But it sounds like, based on what you were just saying, that you spend quite a bit of time over there these days, but you don't do a whole lot of climbing?
You know, I have a bad hip, and I have a hip replacement coming up pretty soon. So when I go out to Smith anymore, I am mainly just going out and seeing people I know and meeting people. And it's really a good time, but it's more like I'm just kind of this, I don't really feel like I'm a climber. I'm more like just kind of this old climber who is meeting people and representing the area. While at heart, I really want to just climb. But right now, it's not working too well until I can get my hip done later this year and actually move again.
Well, I mean, you climbed me under the table on that multi-pitch there. You made quick work of those pitches that I was struggling to navigate. And then for the listener, I just have to share a quick little story here before we dive into our conversation. There's so much to talk about, but my experience at Smith, and this was my first time out there, I really got the royal treatment because you met us out there. I was first filming in Portland with Emil and Cordelia, and then our friends Johan and April, and we torched out to Smith just for the weekend there. And my first experience at Smith was climbing a single pitch with you. I think it was like a 5.9. It was something that was supposed to be very, very easy. It was called Helium Woman, I think. And you hung it up. So I caught you. I belayed the legend Alan Watts on this route here. You hung it up and then you came down and then I climbed it. And I was struggling on it, as I'm sure you'll recall. Just the style of Smith Rock climbing is pretty foreign to me. But I was making my way up the little nubs and the little kind of glassy feet. And then I round a corner, Alan, and do you recall this? I get to the next, what is there, 2 or 3 bolts left before the chains, and none of them had draws on them, and I didn't bring any draws because you hung it up.
Do you recall this?
Well, I was thinking you were just going to top rope. I didn't realize you were going to be leading. And so I come from the old school of where there's a lot more bolts on things now than when I was climbing. I have a lot of trouble going to the gym, for instance, and leading the climb and clipping every bolt because I'm spending more time clipping than climbing. And so if it's an easy section of climbing, I was through the hardest part. It was like, I don't want to stop to clip the bolts because that just takes away from the fun of climbing. So sorry about that. That wasn't intentional, but you were fine. You dealt with it.
I was fine. And the thought that went through my head was like, oh, I'm getting hazed by Alan Watts at Smith. This is the coolest thing ever because I ended up, running out the last 2 bolts. And to your point, it was probably 5, 6 like exit climbing to the chains there. So there was no like actual risk, but I was a little bit gripped as I'm climbing past one empty bolt and then a second empty bolt and getting to the chains. And I lowered off and I was like, man, you hazed me. And I think you didn't even realize.
It was not intentional. I've never hazed people intentionally at Smith.
Well, I'm glad it happened because it made for a great story and a great kickoff to the trip. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in this conversation. But man, it was just such a wonderful dream weekend for me in terms of, having never been out there. Like as a first experience to experience Smith Rock with you as the guide was such a joy. And then, of course, to have Emil there, who was just, he's such a strong climber.
Yeah, no, that was great having him there.
It was so cool to see him on chain reaction, and he didn't flash it. Here's a V15 boulderer, and he didn't flash chain reaction. He did, I think, put it down second go. It was like a little nuance thing that
it didn't look very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't. It did. I mean, ultimately he made it look quite easy. But I will say this, man. What a route. I got on that after Emil climbed it. I got on that as a top rope, and I've done, not that many 12Cs and one 12D and one 13A. So, that's a limit. That would be like a limit grade for me, even here at the Red River Gorge. But to get on that route there, I don't know how much feedback you get on whether that's a sandbagged grade or not, but I wasn't even able to do all the moves. And that's pretty rare for me on something that's like overhung. So I would say chain reaction is pretty stout for the grade. But then again, I would say probably everything at Smith is pretty stout for the grade.
Yeah, I think chain reaction is stout for the grade. A lot of times grades just don't change over the years. And I mean, last time I was on it, it was like, wow, when did this thing get so hard? And I think a lot of climbs at Smith are that way. And I'm not opposed to changing grades, but a lot of these routes, I mean, chain reaction was done 42 years ago. And so they just kind of hold their grades for whatever reason. Even if I try to change the grades, a lot of times people still just call it 12C.
What was the hardest grade in climbing at that time? Do you recall when chain reaction went up?
Oh, it would have been Grand Illusion, which was 13B. Chain reaction at 12C, even for me, it wasn't so much the grade. It wasn't any breakthrough in terms of difficulty. It was more of the style and just the nature of the climb. I mean, just a few months after doing chain reaction, I was in Yosemite and I repeated Cosmic Debris, which was also 13B. So it's like I was climbing, for me, that wasn't a tremendously hard grade. But still, if 13B was the hardest climb in the world, that shows you how long ago that was, because now 13B is something done by 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
And first, early people who have been climbing in the gym for a few months.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. The lens that you have is really quite extensive. And one of my biggest takeaways from the time that I spent with you, we went out and had some food after that first night, and just the perspective that you have, the stories that you shared from, those earlier days, but all the way up to now more recent, where you're just like having these gym sessions and you're seeing what climbing now looks like. And I'm curious to really peel back on that and get your take on the evolution of the sport, of climbing, of route development, setting, all of these things. But I think first, I'm probably getting ahead of myself because I'm so excited to dive into your head here. But I want to start my podcast off like I always do and ask you about struggle. You've got quite a few years of climbing under your belt. And so as you look back, what's your relationship with struggle as a climber?
Wow. I don't know if we have enough time for me to get into all of that. I mean, of course, there's struggle inherent in climbing, but that's not what I really think of. For me, I was young. I discovered climbing like we all, one way or another, we get into climbing. And I was very passionate at it and, got good at it. There was a lot of controversy, a lot of pushback. It was kind of overwhelming. My little Craig, which was just 20 miles from where I was born and raised, became an international destination. Very unlikely thing. So I would say that for me, there was the rise of my climbing, and then there was the fall of my climbing, where I was, for a variety of reasons, just kind of, no longer getting better and having injuries, and just, that was kind of a hard thing. I was essentially an athlete, not like any, professional athlete who has their career and then their post-career. And the post-career was kind of challenging for me, because I became a way better known climber in my post-career than I ever was when I was actually climbing, because climbing was so small back then. We were all just peers. And then years and decades later, I'm still very involved in climbing, but I don't really feel like I still just miss what it was like to be able to climb and climb effortlessly. And so at this point, my struggle is just getting older and trying to stay involved in it when I have some issues, again, right now with my hip, and I have chronic problems with my fingers. They just make it hard for me to do that well or feel that comfortable on the rock. There's people my age who are just crushing it and doing amazing stuff, and that's not me.
Well, I mean, comparison's always a slippery slope, but at least my experience watching you climb out there, it just seems so fluid and so smooth, but I'm not feeling what you're feeling. Although when we were talking, you did say that you spend quite a bit of time in a gym. Is there a gym like near your home that you go to?
Yeah, there's several gyms, and there's a really good one in Bend, the Bend Rock Gym, that I've gone to for a long time. And it's like 10 minutes from my house, and it's just so convenient to go there. And especially with my hip the way it is right now, I can't really boulder because I can't jump off of things. I could hurt myself. I don't like lead climbing because falling is just, I'm concerned I'm going to hit something. So I can go there and just top rope and do auto belays. Experience the challenge of seeing a route. There's the yellow route, and I want to do that thing. And, it's not much different than what I was doing decades ago, except it's indoors. And there's a great community, and so it's fun. I tend to have a little bit more fun indoors right now because I just do a little bit better.
Well, I'm curious on that, because as somebody who you've spent thousands and thousands of days outside, I think I recall reading an interview that you said that, back in those kind of earlier Smith development days, and when you were hard charging as a climber, you were doing more than 300 days outside climbing, 320, 330 days. I mean, that's basically almost every single day climbing outside.
Yeah, I was doing way, way too much. And I was very obsessive. I mean, kind of to a point where it was like a borderline, like mental health sort of thing, where I was just total focus, and that's all that existed. And as I got better, rather than recognizing that I should push hard and then rest and then push hard and rest, I just, if I was climbing 6 days a week, the way to get better is to climb 7 days a week. And if I would climb at night with a headlamp on. I would climb when there was snow on the ground, which was, all very nice and well when you're young and feel like you're indestructible. But when my body starts hurting and I was still just doing that, at that point, I needed some mentor to say, Alan, just slow down. What you're doing is stupid. But back then, that person didn't exist.
Well, I mean, just the drive was so high. And would we be here today, and would the sport be here today if you had less passion or less drive? Probably not, I think.
Well, the sport would be here. Things would have unfolded a little bit differently. I mean, everything any of us have ever done, it's like somebody else would do these things, but obviously Smith Rock would not have played a role, and things would have come later in the U.S. So, I mean, I don't think that I was this person that, had I not done what I did, that climbing right now, people would be, climbing 513 maximum. I mean, none of us had that big of an impact, really. It was just this big group worldwide effort. And I was really fortunate to be part of that.
There were some really unique factors that went into kind of this explosion of sport climbing on our scene, and you being at the epicenter of it over there at Smith Rock. And rather than rehash all of that, I will direct the listener to a great interview that you did with Fitz Cahall and Alex Honnold on Climbing Gold. And there's others out there. Chris Hampton, with his Written in Stone series, has explored certain elements of that time as well. And so I don't feel the need to actually rehash a lot of that. And I don't know, you probably have told a lot of those stories a million times. There's a few that I'll probably still make you tell, because I just find it so interesting and so fascinating as I dig into the history of this sport. But without going into all of that, I think for the listener, it's good to know that there was this certain set of circumstances that essentially led to this evolution in our sport into bolting, wrap bolting, steeper climbing, face climbing, and projecting routes. We just call it red pointing now, or projecting routes. Back in the day, there was a derogatory term, I think, called hang dogging. Now I don't think it's considered derogatory anymore. It's just the way climbers climb. But all of that, if I'm understanding correctly, sprung from necessity. Necessity was the mother of invention here, and you were there at Smith Rock, and there just wasn't a whole lot of trad climbing to do, or you had done it all, and so you were essentially forced to find a new way to climb. Is that a fair way of summarizing that?
I mean, I had definitely dead-ended in terms of what I could do at Smith, and I was committed to climbing there. My friends had moved on to California or Colorado, and I was kind of a homebody. I wanted to develop my area. So I definitely reached a point where there was just not much more to do. But Smith has there's routes that are extremely aesthetic. They're just these gorgeous lines, but they tend to be they're not cracks. These are ruts or these blank vertical faces, and going there every day, I was looking at those things, and it's like, that's what needs to be climbed. But I knew that it was, the tactics of the day. And even at Smith Rock, it was that way. No rappel bolting, no hang dogging, no cleaning of routes. It just didn't work at Smith because the rock was naturally not that good. So, I mean, as it turns out, what evolved at Smith Rock, it was the perfect situation because I was close enough to areas like Yosemite. It was, 12-hour drive. So I knew what was going on. I could test myself against the hardest routes in the world, but I was also far enough away that I could do whatever I wanted to do at Smith, and there was nobody there to tell me no. And by the time sport climbing started to become really controversial and I was getting a lot of pushback, by that time, these people that were giving me pushback, they were still my heroes, but they were more my peers. It was like, we are climbing the same grade, or I'm climbing maybe harder. So when I finally got pushback, it was like, okay, but what does it matter if I'm hanging on the rope and then, red pointing the route later?
Quick question for you, climber friend. What's the first thing you do when you fall off of a climb? You fall and you look at your hands, right? You look at your hands and you say, why have you failed me, hands? And you take a look at your skin and you say, come on, skin, can you give me one more go? Well, the answer is yes. If you are using Rhino Skin Solutions, I'm so psyched to be partnered with Rhino. I've been using Rhino forever. As a climber, I use their performance cream every night before I go to bed. It soothes and strengthens my skin. And then when I'm in season and I really want to keep my skin very dry so that I can keep a hold on those tiny little holds on my project, I'm going to use their dry spray so that keeps my skin from sweating as much. And then I clean my hands really well. I use their cleanse spray, which doesn't require any other water. So if I'm out in the woods, I can just clean my hands real quick out at the crag. And then I'm immediately putting that repair cream on to get my skin back to health after drying it out so much with all that chalk all day. Taking care of your skin is going to not only help you to be able to put in more quality sessions, but also it might be the difference in whether you send or not. So take care of that skin and take care of your wallet, because Rhino's going to give you 20% off just for being a Struggle listener. If you go to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/Rhino, that code will be preloaded to give you 20% off, or just use code STRUGGLE at checkout over at rhinoskinsolutions.com. Let's go. All right, y'all, I just want to take a quick second here to tell you about some Voodoo Magic chalk that I've tried out recently. It's by Rungny. You guys know Rungny. It's Magnus Mitbo's company. They've been supporting the show for a really long time now, which I love. Thank you, Rungny. But this chalk that they just came out with, I don't even know if you can call it chalk. It's called Maglock.
And it's like chalk. It's a super expensive type of chalk for a bag of it, but you only use a teaspoon. And it goes on your clean hands, and you rub it around on your clean hands, and that's kind of like your magic little base layer. I tested this stuff out with Emil Abrahamson when we were out in Portland shooting some videos together. And we did like a side-by-side test hanging from a giant, nasty sloper in the gym. And by far, when we put the mag lock on first and then used like regular mag dust afterwards, we hung way longer than when we were just using regular chalk. So like if you've got a project and you're like, look, I need that extra little edge to level up and send this thing, check out the mag lock. It's just wild how it feels and how it works. I don't need to sell it. Just try it and you'll see the difference. You can use code STRUGGLE and get 10% off pretty much everything over at Rungny. You can get a bundle, which will score you some free shipping. And again, if you use that code STRUGGLE over at Rungny.com, that also helps me to continue to make these shows that you're listening to. During that time, when essentially you were like a pariah, which it sounds like ultimately, carried quite a bit of weight on you, which is understandable.
I think I was a pariah. That's a good word to describe me. I haven't heard that one before, but maybe so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for a bit at least. But then your evolution from pariah to hero to visionary to legend had this 30-year arc. But when you're in it and you're with your peers and it's a small community, you don't have the benefit of hindsight. You don't know how the story ends. So when you're in it and you are getting a lot of side eye at the crag or people maybe being outright hostile to you, how did you handle that?
Fortunately, if I was at Smith, I didn't get that much of it. When I was elsewhere, I really tried to avoid it. I'm not a confrontational person. I want to get along with people. I'm not an in-your-face sort of like, I will do things my way. And so I just pretty much kept a low profile and tried to avoid it. And most of the time at Smith Rock, through several years when I was doing the earliest sport climbs, again, there were just, nobody was coming there. Nobody even knew what was going on. It was like just a few of us. Like I was doing these routes and had projects, and then I'd go to Yosemite and do the hardest free line there, and I'd realize, what I'm doing at Smith Rock is harder, but nobody has any idea. So that was really fun. And once that changed, once the floodgates opened, it was within just a month or two, nobody there to everybody there. And it was overwhelming, really.
It was the tipping point for that for Smith when you appeared on the cover. Was it Mountain Magazine that you appeared on the cover in that like iconic chain reaction photo?
Yeah, that really was, more than anything else, that was the tipping point. I mean, people were starting to come a little bit and people were hearing about Smith Rock, but that picture was it was such an iconic shot, and that led to just, not just climbers from around the country, but just international climbers just flooded the place just within just a few months. And there were articles in pretty much all the European climbing magazines and in the U.S. climbing magazines. There was a feature article in Outside magazine. It all kind of just came together at the same time. But definitely that chain reaction photo, if there was a single turning point, that was it.
Yeah, it caused a chain reaction, not just in Smith, but also in the sport itself. I want to take a little bit of a detour for a second here. For those who are listening right now, who, like me, just a few months ago, before I went to Smith for the first time, haven't visited Smith, you talk about it, how it was kind of like it wasn't on anybody's radar, and then all of a sudden it was on everybody's radar. And what is it about Smith that makes Smith special? Why did you stay there when others went to the more established climbing areas?
Well, it's a beautiful place. I mean, it's just, you walk into Smith and you can see everything. It's not one of those places where you're walking through the trees and you see the cliff up ahead where you can see from one side to the other, the whole main area, what everybody's doing. It's like a big amphitheater. It's a spectacular setting. And at the time, the climbs that I was focused on, and the most famous climbs on the West Coast, were pretty much all granite routes, cracks, and the granite faces for the most part were just too blank. You could climb the cracks. You could do, the Phoenix in Yosemite, but you were never going to do the right wall of Phoenix. There were no holds. It was just smooth, blank granite. And at Smith, there were holds everywhere. All the vertical faces, overhanging walls, there were holds everywhere. So you could kind of see there's really no limits here. Like anything will go free. And now that's such a common thing. I mean, every sport climbing area is just, people recognize that there's holds everywhere and you can climb wherever you want. But at the time, it was kind of a novel concept. And it was so different than, again, what you saw in granite areas.
And just to take it one step even simpler for myself, as well as the listener who wasn't coming up through climbing in that era, the reason, correct me if I'm wrong, that all of the hard climbs and the climbs just in general were cracks was that you could place protection. But at that time, there was no such thing as being able to place protection on face climbs because you couldn't get nuts or cams into these things, and bolts hadn't, I don't know if invented is the right word, but essentially the practice of bolting steep routes, everything was like a ground up ethic, right? I'm probably mixing up a whole bunch of different concepts here, but essentially cracks were what people climbed because that's what you could protect. In faces, some people would climb maybe free solo, but there just wasn't a way to protect them. Is that an oversimplification?
I mean, that's for the most part correct. You could protect them, but the ethic dictated that you bring your bolt as you're leading. So you would have to find a place where you could stop, let go, maybe hang off of a sky hook or something and put the bolt in. And everything was hand drilled. So instead of having your power drill where you could drill a hole in 30 seconds, you had to, just have your hammer in this little handheld bit and just tap. And at Smith, I'd drill like 4-inch holes, and it would take me 45 minutes or an hour to drill one hole. And so to stand on nubbins and just run out and put in a bolt, I did it a few times, but that was not much fun. And anywhere, even in on granite, they wouldn't put in 3/8-inch bolts or 1/2 inch. They'd put in 1/4-inch bolts that were really short. But still, you're like on a friction slab standing there trying to drill, and it was not much fun. So yeah, I think that it was the power drill ultimately is what really changed things. I did a lot of stuff. I probably put in a couple hundred hand drilled bolts at Smith, all the early sport climbs. But once all of a sudden there was a power drill, then, it's one thing bolting a vertical wall, bolting something that's super steep. It's really hard to wrap down and put in bolts. It's just by hand, even with a power drill, it's hard. So the power drill really opened the door to, the future.
And that's why all those old school routes are so run out. It's because you just didn't want to sit there and hammer in another bolt so that I could feel safe when I was climbing it 30 years later.
That's certainly part of it. Because, it was an hour per hole. If you could avoid putting in a bolt, you'd avoid putting in a bolt. And a lot of times, if you were doing a route that was 512 and it had a 30-foot run out on 510 at the top, you didn't need bolts there. And so a lot of those things have been retro bolted, and that's good, but there's still an old school feel where there's part of you can experience whether you want it or not. Sometimes that's still around a bit at Smith Rock.
Well, I felt it. Even if what I was on was retro bolted, it still felt more run out than I'm accustomed to. But to your point, this newer generation of climber is more accustomed to learning climbing at the gym first and then moving outside. And so at the gym, if there's bolts every 6 feet and you go outside and there's bolts every 10 or 12 feet, it feels super run out, even though, it's actually quite safe. Or you go get on a route like Snake Dyke or something like that, where it's run out 40 feet between bolts, that's going to feel like an incredibly scary situation. Whereas if you start outside and that's just what you're accustomed to, then it doesn't feel as shocking. And so it makes sense to me that you mentioned that you skip bolts at the gym. Well, I want to peel back. I kind of want to tackle this in like a past, present, and future type scenario here, because I think that there's much that's been done and written and said on the past, and you're such a critical part of that story. But you also get to look through that lens at the present and maybe even pontificate with me a little bit about what the future of climbing might look like. But while we're still looking at the past, I want to look at just a few of these key moments, if we could. And one of the big ones that comes to mind here is Just Do It. And I want to get the kind of the provenance, if you will, the origin story of Just Do It, because you mentioned to me when we were out there that it had to do with like a TV show, if I recall. And so I'd love to hear how Just Do It came to be in the first place.
Well, I climbed on Monkey Face and, the east face of Monkey Face, a trad crack that was done in 1985. That was the hardest climb in the country at that point. I had done that, and I'd always looked over to the left, and it's like, there's some holds over there on that blank wall. But I never really had, I rapped down it, but I never really thought about doing it. And then I got a letter from Mike Hoover, he produced different, he had produced the Survival of the Fittest competition circuit, with this thing that they held at Smith Rock in different places. And he had this idea, let's bring some top climbers together and let's have them establish a really like a world standard route and film it for NBC Sports World, which was something that aired on Saturday. It was like ABC's Wide World of Sports, but it was kind of, I'm dating myself because nobody remembers what that was, but just a big sports show. And I was enlisted to choose the route. And I was like, that would be a perfect route. And the climbers were Wolfgang Gulich flew in from Germany and Ron Kauk from California. And we came together. We had 3 days of filming to do this route. And in the week before, I decided, okay, well, I'm going to do what came to be known as just do it. I'm going to bolt it, wrap down, put in all the bolts. Kauk showed up the day before Wolfgang did, and we went there to try it. And we were, right away, it's hard right off the ground. And we both realized we have 3 days, and they're just going to see us failing, We're not even going to come close. So at that point, the route was there, but we completely bailed on that. And I bolted last second something else. And the show came together. It was a cringeworthy thing to watch now. They didn't do a great job with it, but that's how that route came to exist. And also for me, looking back, that was really a great experience, not because there were a film crew, but being able to, who wouldn't want to share a few days climbing with Ron Kauk and Wolfgang Gulich? That was back in those years. That was just a priceless memory.
Oh, unbelievable. Just two absolute legends. And just, God, dude, it just strikes me as so funny. You throw this thing together for a TV show. You're like, oh, let me just this looks like the thing. It ends up becoming one of the most iconic routes in sport climbing and in U.S. sport climbing history. And I'm assuming at the time, maybe you didn't even recognize that because you were stressed out about the TV show and all that. But when you had made the call, like, oh, this is not going to come together. We're not going to send this thing. How much time had you spent on it? Did Ron and Wolfgang spend any time on it? Like, what was the verdict on what once became, ultimately became Just Do It as you guys were sussing it out?
As I was preparing it, I spent a lot of time just playing with the moves and figuring out I wasn't going to bolt something that just simply had no chance of going. So I spent several days bolting it and figuring out where the bolts should go. And it's not just a matter of wrapping down and blindly putting in bolts and hoping that the thing goes. But when Ron and I tried it, we only tried it we were there for 2 or 3 hours. We both were just on top rope working through all the sections. And we made the decision before Wolfgang even showed up that this isn't going to work. I wish Wolfgang would have got on it because the upper part, the hardest part, would have been very much his sort of thing. But again, it was all about the film crew was coming and there was a pressure. We had to deliver. We had to have something to do. So it was bolted. Did I recognize it was going to become an iconic, influential climb? Not in the slightest bit. It was just this thing I noticed. It was, it was impressive, but it was just hardly gave it a thought, really.
Yeah, just another Alan Watts route. Yeah, it's on the monkey face, so it's iconic just kind of in its setting, where it's at. But
that is true.
It became this thing, and it's even after it became this thing, it feels like it's become even more of a legend, if you will, because of Tribout and the story around that. And we talked a little bit about this, but I'd love to just peel back, if we could here, for the listening audience, that at least the common understanding, and maybe part of the common understanding in climbing, is that Tribout, essentially stole that route from you, that he came in and, it was red tagged in the sense that was going to be your route to work and put up, and that he came and did it. But when we were talking, you said, no, that actually wasn't the case.
Yeah, that wasn't the case. You can't have stolen from you that which you cannot do, in climbing. And this thing was just too hard for me. And there was no real concept of red tag back then. So I wanted it to get done. GB, his first visit to Smith Rock was in 1986. He did To Bolt or Not to Be, which was a project of mine that I'd worked on a fair amount back in as early as 1984. I wanted him to do it. It was good for him to do it because it was a bit too hard for me at the time. I did it a couple years later, but having that route to Boulder not to be done when it was done, that was really an important turning point in U.S. climbing, in that it really validated the methods that were being used at Smith Rock and all around the world at a time when it was very controversial. And Just Do It was kind of the same sort of thing, where it's like, this is too hard for me, GB, go at it. He wasn't the only one. Scott Franklin worked on it. DDA Rabitou worked on it. I mean, we had a couple, there was another route of mine that GB did steal, but that wasn't one of the ones we're talking about. So Just Do It. It was, more power to you, GB.
So there was no beef there, it sounds like, but then there was some subsequent beef that Jibe, came in and snatched a different route. And was that something that, as you said, there wasn't really such thing as a red tag, but you had made it clear to him, like, hey, this one over here is mine, and he still went and did it anyway?
Yeah, I asked him. He came to Smith frequently, and we were friends, and we are friends. And there's a route that came to be known as Bad Man in the Agra Gully, and this is the sort of thing you wrap down, a lot of loose rock. I spent days and days cleaning it, and I was really close to doing it. I'd made it through the hardest part and was fell on the upper wall, but I was having problems with my fingers, and I was just kind of needing to take some time off. And GB was just starting to work on Just Do It, and we were talking, and I was like, yeah, you go ahead, and that thing on Monkey Face is yours. All I ask is let me do just this one route. Let me just do this one thing, because I want to do a 514, a new route at Smith Rock, and it's not going to be that hard for you. Just let me do it. And he was like, okay, sure, no problem. And then I found out, like a few months later in January, he flew from Paris to Redmond, Oregon for a week, and then back to Paris just to do that route. So it wasn't just, a complete flying halfway around the world just to do this 14A.
Oh, no.
And again, that just kind of annoyed me, because it was like, it felt like the era of being able to work your own project and complete it kind of ended at Smith Rock. And I was having a lot of finger issues and kind of wearing out. So, as much as anything, I was just frustrated that my climbing was kind of heading in the wrong direction. But then he did Just Do It a couple years after that. And we, when he was here doing that, we were friends. It was fine. There was really no hard feelings. It probably got blown out of proportion a little bit.
It does sound like a jerk move to fly all the way in for a week to do the one route that you told him not to get on. But again, the time period and just, I think, the relationships in climbing, to your point, it was such a small community that maybe we've made it a bigger thing. We, the community, have made it a bigger thing in hindsight. But I'll tell you what, Alan, it does sound like kind of a jerk move to fly halfway across the world just to take somebody else's route.
I wasn't happy. It was for a while. I let it go, but for a while I wasn't very happy at all, because I was training for that and I knew I could do it. And, it would have been nice if he didn't do it. But GB was, that was just his style, and he didn't mind ruffling some feathers, to say the least.
Right.
He enjoyed it.
Well, it's interesting because, neither did you in your own way. You weren't intentionally doing it, but kind of being this rule breaker, if you will, and people calling you cheater, that was ruffling feathers as well. And there's a broader discussion here that I'd love to just explore for a few minutes if we can. And maybe it's going to be a little bit nerdy, but I'm okay with that. Just around rules, because there are no rules, right? So like the rules are in quotes. It's just like, what's the ethic of the time, or what's the consensus? And this is a conversation that we have in climbing all the time. I had a conversation with Adam Andra about knee pads and how, when he was younger, knee pads didn't exist. They weren't even an option. And he would spend months conditioning his skin and his knees so that he could do the one knee bar, one go on his route. And now you can just strap on rubber. And should a climb be downgraded or not because of that? And again, there's no rules, right? It's rat bolting and hang dogging and projecting and ground up. I guess this has just been like a bit of a discussion, kind of as old as the sport is itself. And so you've broken some rules in your day, but you've also, I think, respected or adhered to what might be considered rules or common ethical norms. And so where do you stand as you've got this lens back on kind of the quote unquote rules of climbing?
Yeah, there always are rules there. There still are to some. The things that people were arguing about 40 years ago, I don't think there's not much of an issue about that now. Nobody now is yelling at you, hang dogger, that sort of stuff. Those days are long gone. But I don't know. I mean, the rules that evolved in the U.S. were really kind of odd. It was a peculiar way to climb where on the hardest routes, for instance, you couldn't ever hang dog. You couldn't hang and then work out some moves. But what was totally fine to do on the hardest routes is have a group of climbers come. One person would lead up, they would fall off, they would lower down and just leave all the gear in place. And then somebody else would tie in. They would top rope up to the high point and maybe do another move, maybe put in another piece. They'd lower down. Then they would leave, come back the next day. The rope would still be there. And it was just this team yo-yo ascent, which obviously is not very good style. But there was just this ethic. It was just kind of like how it evolved. And it was just, the rules really needed to be questioned. I mean, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, that the hang dogging thing and putting bolts in on rappel, it just opened up this whole new world. And I knew I was breaking the rules. I mean, at the time it would annoy me because I would get that all the time. Like, you're cheating. And anybody could do the route if, you did it that way. And I'd always like, no, I'm not cheating. It's just, it's valid. And, just having these endless arguments where I was really tired of it. And then a few years ago, I was doing a talk and I just decided to look up in a dictionary, what's the meaning of the word cheat or cheater. And it was like to break the rules to gain an unfair advantage. And it was like, that's it. That's exactly what I was doing. I was trying to break the rules to gain an advantage so I could climb harder routes. So that's why Alex Honnold's Climbing Gold podcast, that's why it's called Cheater, because I kind of was cheating. I was breaking the rules. But then, it's funny because there are rules I had that were stupid rules that really were important to me. Like, I would never, in the early to mid 80s, when the European influence came, I never would leave a quick draw on any bolt ever, or pre-place any gear. Like, that was just not okay. That would disqualify the ascent. And nobody does that anymore. And then there started to be bouldering pads. So all these boulder problems that you used, like Midnight Lightning, it's kind of a highball boulder problem, not that bad, but still. Without a pad, you could fall and you could hurt yourself. And then people would be stacking up all these pads. And it's like, really? Is that okay? And then stick clips, where you could clip not just the first bolt, but you'd have people with a stick clip and they'd clip like the first 3 bolts on a 5-bolt route. So again, that's like, is that okay? But I've also recognized over the years that I am not somebody now who is going to be, I got so much pushback a long time ago that I'm pretty open to what people are doing. I'm not going to be the one that's having an argument. It's like, does that really count if you stick clip bolt number 3? It's like, yeah, whatever, it counts. But there's always going to be some little stylistic arguments. But at this point, I'm done with that. I don't need to go there.
All right, y'all. Just want to take a quick second here to tell you how I'm staying healthy and taking care of myself as I'm now pushing my body to the hardest limits I've ever pushed it as a rock climber. And the way that I'm fueling these gains that I'm working so hard to get is with PhysiVantage Nutrition. Y'all know PhysiVantage. They've been a sponsor of the show since the very first episode, and I've been a paying customer of PhysiVantage since long before there was ever a podcast. And why is that, Ryan? Why am I buying PhysiVantage products? Well, it's because they work. They're designed by climbers for climbers to help us climb our best. Every single day, I'm taking their supercharged collagen before I do like a little light fingerboard workout, like the Abra hangs that I've talked about here on this show, or before I go climbing or go to the gym. And I'm also fueling up either before or after a workout with one of their protein powders. It's like my sweet treat that I have. And the most important thing, as I mentioned, is that it works. Most coaches and doctors and dietitians are going to tell you that you should probably take in about a gram of protein per body weight every single day if you're an athlete and you're trying to fuel your gains. So for me, 155 grams of protein is a lot of protein in a day. And I love a whole foods diet, but I have to supplement in order to hit that goal. And I do it by using PhysiVantage. Hit that link right there in your show notes and you'll get 15% off pretty much everything over at the PhysiVantage store, or use code STRUGGLE15 at checkout to get that discount, and let's get after it. Hey, I'm really psyched to say that Arc'teryx has come aboard to support me and the podcast, and I just couldn't be more excited because Arc'teryx, as I'm sure you know, is just one of the most well-regarded, highest-performing brands in the outdoor space, and that is evidenced by their athlete team, many of whom we've had on the show here. Friends of the show, Jonathan Segrist, Drew Ruana, Amity Warm, Jordan Cannon, so many more out there are crushing it in Arc'teryx gear. They take really, really good care of their athlete team, and they take the best care of me and everybody else who wears Arc'teryx gear because this stuff holds up. Right now, this is a podcast, so you can't see what I'm wearing, but I am wearing the Delta Half Zip pullover. It's bright orange. I'm sure you've seen me in my interviews and climbing in this thing. It is crazy soft. It's crazy lightweight. And I'm also loving right now, kind of in these spring, summer temperatures where we're going to be getting some rain if I'm hiking into the trails or I'm going for a little adventure with my family, the Gamma lightweight hoodie. It's super, super soft. It's super comfortable. It's got a hood with a little visor on it. It packs really small. Everything that Arc'teryx makes is just of the highest quality. It lasts forever. They've been doing it for over 35 years. They love climbing, and I love them. You can learn more over at their website. You can hit that link in the show notes or swing over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/Arc'teryx. Well, you said something in there that really struck me, and that's that you said you had some rules, even rules that you might have considered now in hindsight very silly rules, but they were important to you. So like you wouldn't climb a route with draws that were hung, and you didn't mention what other people thought or that it was somebody else's rule. That's just how you considered it to be good style of an ascent. And so maybe one of the takeaways that at least I'll have from this is that, yeah, there may be some kind of quote unquote rules out there or various different ethics or styles, but it's really more about like, what do we feel? How do I feel about this ascent? Am I okay with stick clipping the second or third bolt and still feeling good? Like, okay, cool. Am I okay with pre-hung draws? Yes or no? We kind of like as climbers get to decide, because unless you're competing, unless it's a IFSC event or a competition or a, Olympic event, the rules aren't really rules. They're just these general kind of guidelines to a sport that have come over the years and evolved and maybe have reached some sort of consensus now, but will likely be different in another 10 years. I mean, you've seen all the rules be established and broken probably multiple times over the last 40 years.
Well, that's true. And a lot of them are not that important, just like you're saying, whether somebody has a draw hanging on a bolt or stick clips, whatever bolt. I mean, these are really minor issues, in the big scheme of things. So again, I was kind of at the forefront of something a long time ago that was very controversial. And let's just say there was way more controversy in climbing, way more in the 80s than there has ever been since or ever will be in the future. And I'm really glad of that. That was getting in the way of progression and getting in the way of just having a good time and climbing with your friends.
Well, thanks for bringing us to that notion here, because almost everybody who's listening to this show right now does not make their living as a rock climber. We climb because it brings us a lot of joy. And I'm curious, as you look back on the different chapters of your climbing life, when you were in those earlier days and like hard charging, getting really strong, one of the strongest climbers in the entire world at the time, what was motivating you? What got you the most psyched? And maybe we can contrast that with now your experience as a climber after you had kind of gone past some of those peak performance days. But in those earlier days, were you motivated by grades, by performance, by flow, by first ascents, by competition? Like, what was the fire in you that kept you going, 6 days a week?
I mean, all of those factors to some degree. There were just so few of us. Nobody was getting into climbing back then for, there was no end that, where I'm going to make a living or I'm going to become a famous climber, or it's like that didn't even really exist. We all entered the sport for, we had pretty pure reasons. It was just, there was something about the sport that really appealed to us. Once I started improving and getting good, I was super competitive. I really observed what other people were doing, and it really helped me a lot to have other climbers that I was climbing with who were really good, who were pushing me, and they would do something and harder than I did. And I wouldn't be like, oh, that's fine. It'd be like, I got to work harder. So yeah. Certainly there was a competitive element. And then I just started to see, these routes that it's like you wrap down something, you put bolts in, you start climbing it. It's no different than it is today. It's like, I think I can do this thing. And you start working on it. And it's like, I know I can do this thing. And you spend a few days, and that becomes the biggest thing, I guess, is just to be able to have a goal and be able to, at the end, check it off on your little list of routes you want to do. And kind of an odd pursuit, but, that was my thing, just to do the hardest routes in the U.S. that I grew up kind of, idolizing the climbers and these very famous routes. But beyond that, just to do my own lines. There was no end beyond that. And how it evolved it's a real curiosity. But, I was just focused and wanted to climb hard routes. Just very simple. And eventually I got to where Smith Rock, I wanted Smith Rock to rise. So anything that was going on there, I felt was sort of that's why I was so accepting of when like GB came and did To Bolt or Not to Be, or Just Do It, because it was like, as Smith Rock rose, I felt like I was part of that rise.
Yeah, that's incredibly just collaborative, gracious of you, I think, to first think about the area and helping an area to rise more so than, I guess, your own personal status.
It wasn't what I first thought of. At first, I kind of wanted to become somebody that was a well-known climber at Smith Rock. And it eventually evolved to where Smith Rock, I was so associated with that place that I had trouble distinguishing, Smith Rock from myself. It was just all kind of one and the same. So as I matured and got older, I became a nicer person. Not quite as me-focused.
Well, I think that's, common trajectory for youth who then gain some experience and some maturity. But you really succeeded at the highest level on both of those, ultimately. You became one of the best climbers in the world in your day. You put up incredible first ascents that have brought, thousands and thousands of people such joy and experience and personal growth. And you helped to elevate Smith Rock into the place that it's rightfully at within the world of climbing and also just hiking and exploring. So you kind of knocked them all out of the park. But as a climber, I'm curious now to just bring this thing current here because you still climb. You and I had a great couple days out on rock there. But as you mentioned, you spent a lot of time at the gym as well. And now what's the experience like for you? What motivates you? What do you seek? Are you still motivated by performance, by doing the hardest thing that you could do at the gym or on a trip or something like that? Or is it a totally different motivation, a totally different experience now than it was 20 or 30 years ago?
It's totally different for the most part, but there's still nothing more that I enjoy than finding some route that it's like, I think maybe I can do this thing. And then I try, and just going through that whole thing where you're failing and failing and failing. And then you have this breakthrough where all of a sudden you realize, well, I can do this. And then I'm at home, just kind of, practicing the moves and thinking about it, just some stupid green route at the gym, but there's something about that that really appeals to my personality type. And I love that. And I still occasionally will do a route that I feel really good about, where I will, get to the top and just I'm as psyched as I was when I was 22 years old. So
Yes.
that element is still there. But I have limitations. I've had chronic problems with my hands and fingers, and that's never gone away. I just simply I climbed too much. I never rested. By the time I was out of my 20s, it never recovered. I'd have no resilience. I have to take 2 or 3 days off after every day of climbing. Anytime I really trained and tried to get better and really tried to see what I can do and how far I can go, I always get injured. It just doesn't work. So I've had to accept that I still like to get as good as I could get, but I don't. If it becomes this all-consuming thing, I get frustrated and I don't have fun with it. But there's also this element of community that didn't exist, or hardly existed back in the 80s. I mean, I had a few friends, but now, it's just this amazing community of climbers and people I meet of all ages. And I'm 65 and I wouldn't be hanging out with teenagers or people in their 20s as peers. And that's something I really appreciate with climbing. I don't see any other way in my life where I would be doing that. I'd be sitting on my porch just kind of yelling at kids to get off my lawn, or I don't know what I'd be doing. But I go climbing and I meet people who are Like I climbed yesterday with this 24-year-old crusher climber and just had the best time. And it wasn't, like, you're younger than my children sort of thing. It was just, we were just peers sharing beta and that sort of stuff. So I really enjoy that. And just, going out to Smith Rock anymore, I every time, like I went out there, when I was out there yesterday, somebody was asking me what route we were working on, and I told them, and there was a whole group of climbers from New Jersey who had flown from New Jersey to climb at Smith Rock, and meeting those climbers, and I don't know, it was just like, I will never ever get tired of that. Just the enthusiasm, and they're like really happy to meet me, and I'm happy to meet them, and it kind of makes my day.
Man, that's so cool.
And that's never going to go away, even if I have to be like wheeled down to Smith Rock or whatever. Hopefully that's a long ways away, but I can still connect with people, and that will always be part of my experience. It's not like someday I'll be forced into retirement and, in climbing. I can still be part of the climbing community as long as I'm around. And for that, I am very grateful.
It's so beautiful, dude. And it's palpable too, to at least walk through those trails with you at Smith for the couple days we were there, and people coming up to you and, just asking for a photo or to say hi or to shake your hand or sign a guidebook or whatever it might be. You really have earned your position there, like in the respect and the adulation that you receive. I'm curious about the experiences that you have at the gym, though, because sometimes more and more as the sport evolves, it's kind of evolving in almost as separate sports. There's some people that go to the gym and it's not to train or practice to go outside, but it's to just enjoy the gym for how fun the gym is. And you say that some of your more fun days climbing sometimes are at the gym, which is great. I have a lot of fun days at the gym as well. But are there people at the gym who don't know who Alan Watts is and don't know what an Alan Watts route is? And, what's your take on the future of the climbers that you come into contact mostly at the gym now?
Yes, most climbers at the gym have no idea, who I am or who I was, or not just me. They don't know anybody from back in that era. That's fine. It's like, it's not that important that people in my generation be known or anything, especially in bouldering gyms. I did, after my last Smith Rock guidebook came out, I traveled to a lot of gyms and just selling some guidebooks and just doing a slideshow and that sort of stuff. And I met lots of climbers. And at bouldering gyms, I would have, the owners would say, 90% of our climbers don't really climb outside. They're just boulders. And so a lot of people, most people wouldn't know me, and that would be fine. I did an event at Vertical World where they had advertised it a bit, and there were some posters on the wall that I was going to be talking about the origins of sport climbing. And I had this very nice young man come up to me. He was maybe, 18 years old. And he was like, "Are you Alan Watts?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I'm really happy that you're here. It's great to meet you." And it's like, I got to admit, I don't know much about your climbing, but I understand you set some of the first routes. And I was like, "Well, yeah, it's nice to meet you too." And I did. I set the first sport routes in the first sport climbing area in the country, Smith Rock. And he was like, "Well, that is so cool." He said, "Where is it? Where's the Smith Rock gym?" So, and I'm not telling that story to like knock the guy. I'm sure he was like crushing harder than I was, but it just shows how different it is. That's people are in, in the bouldering gyms. There's people who are, like people really climb outside. That's a thing, So
yeah,
I thought that was funny because that just shows how far, how much things have changed.
Oh, it's so good though. It's so good. Where's the Smith Rock gym? Oh, like, yeah, because like in his mind, you like set the really rad pink route over there in the corner or something,
He did ask me, he said, are the routes still there? And I was like, well, yeah, they're still there. And that should have been a clue that what was coming next.
Right. Yeah, no, there was no catastrophic landslides that took the routes out. Oh God, that's good though. I love that. Well, it's really, it's interesting because again, you've just by your very nature, and I don't know if it's nature or nurture here, but you have, it doesn't seem like, haven't clinged to the past. You're not a traditionalist in the sense of the word where you've wanted to hold on to old ways of doing things. And, a lot of the new ways of doing things are doing things indoors and embracing different styles of climbing, bouldering. John Gill was a bit of a if not a pariah, a total weirdo back in the day when he just wanted to climb these short little things. And, the sport has evolved in ways where now it's almost a different sport in a sense when you look at like indoor dynamic competition style climbing or system board climbing, like kilter boards and these kinds of things. And, the sport has grown in awesome ways to make it more accessible to lots of different types of people. And you've embraced a lot of that. And so I'm curious what like modern day Alan Watts climber looks like. When you go to the gym, you get a gym session. You've already talked about, having some of these chronic injuries and ailments. And for me, I'm in my mid 40s. I want to be climbing when I'm in my 60s and 70s. Climbing is a sport that one can do for a very long time. And there's lots of different ways to enjoy climbing. So what does climbing look like for you now? And do you have any perspectives or tips even for myself and those who are listening who want to be able to enjoy the sport many decades into their future?
As much as anything, it is pretty important to have fun doing it. And climbing isn't always fun if you're trying to, do your route and you're up working on it. I mean, climbing's really hard. It's hard to when your forearms are screaming and, you're just at your very limit. It's not like it's that much fun or if you're scared. But there's a difference between just the difficulty of trying to climb a route and then just the frustration of like, I'm not having much fun. I'm climbing and I'm coming away and I'm in a worse mood after climbing than I was before. And I still experience that all the time. And now I am willing to just like, okay, I'm going to take a week off or I'm going to take a couple weeks off and just wait and then go back climbing. And if it's not working and I'm frustrated and I'm in pain, just don't, there's plenty of time. And if I would have taken time off back when I was back in the 80s, when my fingers were hurting or I had problems, if I just would have slowed down and it's like, okay, I'm going to take a few weeks off, I would have had a way more productive, way longer climbing career. So really, as much as anything, is just slow down and just no matter how much you want it, sometimes the absolute best thing you can do for your climbing is to not climb and just rest and recover, because it has to be, you have to have the excitement about it. And if it's something that's just beating you up, whether it's a project or just whatever it is, if it's not clicking, just slow down a little bit and do something else. And I always find when I come back and like right now, I haven't climbed at the gym for a few weeks and I'm probably going to go tomorrow, but I just had, for whatever reason, I was having some struggles there and it's like, this sucks. I'm not having fun. So it's not a catastrophe. I just wait and I bet you next time I go, I'm going to have a great time. And I've been climbing at Smith Rock more. So that's been good. And yes, just don't. I mean, I was so focused and climbing became way too important to me. And I think that's pretty common for a lot of young climbers who are way, way into it. They don't really see any other, that is just their world.
Yeah.
And that leads to burnout.
It's so interesting that you bring that up because I've actually been experiencing that myself. I wouldn't consider myself a young climber, but I'm a really stoked climber. And I've been very focused recently being like the last few years, maybe 4 or 5 years, on performance and pushing my performance higher and, chasing higher grades and this kind of thing, which I gained so much pleasure out of. I know you've experienced that phase as well, where I'm stoked to train and to eat well and to sleep well, and I'm running beta in my head at night. And so it's mostly a net positive. But more recently, I've been feeling like I'll go to the crag and maybe I won't do the thing I wanted to do, and I'll kind of leave there feeling a little down. And what you just said there, I think, has maybe reinforced a little quieter voice in the back of my head saying, hey, maybe just go have some fun days. Because I'll tell you what, when I look back on the last 12 months of my climbing, right at the top of my list of my most fun days was like being out with you on that day and swinging leads on a 5/8 or whatever, that multi-pitch went. And it was extra special because I was with you at Smith. But even if I had just been with a normal, like a regular climbing friend of mine, that route was an absolute delight. And the lichen on the rock and the views of the river and the wind blowing and topping it out and all of that. And I didn't pull a limit move on any of it, but it was just such a purely joyful experience. And so, yeah, maybe even if it's not walking away for a couple of weeks, if it's just like saying, hey, maybe don't try to performance climb for a little bit. that could be like the palate cleanser that I need. So I appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, and that day for me was one of my top, I don't know, 5 days of climbing in the last year, just from an enjoyment standpoint. Just like sheer fun, a route that I've done many times before. It's not a challenge, like it's not a performance thing. It's just, occasionally I have times where I just kind of reconnect with like why I climb and why I fell in love with the sport, where it's just, I'm just out with a friend, just out having a wonderful time. And that's the way that experience was.
Well, man, likewise. It was just such a dream day. So yeah, thank you for making that happen. Well, gosh, this has just been like a freaking dream having this conversation. There's so much more we could talk about. Is there anything that I didn't touch on? Is there anything, you give a lot of speeches, you've written books, you do these presentations, you've done a million interviews. I'm sure we've covered a lot of the greatest hits, if you will. But when you think back on some of those other great memories, great days on rock, or just the way the sport has evolved and your impact on it, is there anything that I didn't touch on or anything that you'd like to share?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, really, of course, because after I've been climbing at Smith Rock for 50 years, and I've had the opportunity to climb with just so many climbers. And so, I mean, it's been kind of just an amazing experience, and there's a lot of different facets to it. Like I was the co-founder of EP, the climbing wall company in the US, and a long time ago. Now that's a whole different thing. I'm not so sure that, that's a whole different conversation. But I do have kind of this unique perspective in that not only was I part of climbing and then the beginnings of sport climbing in the U.S., but the first climbing gyms in the U.S. were Northwest, Vertical Club, Vertical World in Seattle, the Portland Rock Gym. They happened in the Northwest, and they kind of grew out of what was going on at Smith Rock. And the first climbing holds in the U.S. were all made in Bend, right? Just right next to Smith Rock. And so that whole industry, to some degree, was connected with what was going on at Smith Rock and the beginnings of sport climbing. And I was involved in that business for a decade. It was not, it was not some great success story, but it is amazing for me to see just how that also evolved into this whole different crazy thing. And, with gyms, wonderful, amazing mega gyms all over the world, and climbing competitions and World Cup and Olympics. And yeah, it's, again, had I not lived, all of those things would have happened. It was not like I really did that much, really. But looking back, I had just a little piece of all of these different elements of the sport, and I was kind of there for so many different parts of it. I mean, I was the route setter for the first snowbird competition, the first international competition in the U.S.
Yeah.
I brought the first holds from Europe to the U.S. in 1986, the first modular holds. And again, the Portland Rock Gym and Vertical Club, and those were like, never could have imagined what would happen and how, remember when Gary Rawl at the Portland Rock Gym told me he was starting a climbing gym? I just was like, oh, Gary, I wish you the best. I'll give you a hug. It's going to be a tough road. But
oh my God, dude, that's
looking
great.
back, like how everything evolved. And I still enjoy it. I really enjoy it. I will stream World Cup climbing competitions. I really just enjoy. I'm kind of a sports fan, and I look at it kind of the same way I look at, watching some other sport. But with climbing, I, of course, know more about it. But I appreciate all the directions, and there's really nothing that I look at that is like, ugh, I'm not happy with the way climbing has gone. It's just the opposite. And to have had just a little piece of all these things a long time ago, just kind of is pretty cool. It's like a good use of my life,
Hell yeah.
I kind of feel like I did what I was supposed to do in whatever, that's oddly enough, I think I served my purpose. Not that climbing was my only purpose, but that was an important part, and still is, and always will be.
So beautiful, man. Yeah, thank you for doing it. God, I'm just so psyched talking to you, because there is just such a clarity and a pureness to your love of the sport, and that you still stream, climbing competitions and this kind of thing. Like you're not clinging to the glory days, if you will. Like today is the glory day. And man, on behalf of everybody listening, very grateful to you for putting in the work and having the vision and having the thick skin to put up with the blowback at the time, because what you've done for me as a climber and so many others is just a real gift. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And again, it's been wonderful to be part of what you're doing and get to spend time with you at Smith Rock. And, it's the best. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
All right, y'all, that wraps up this conversation with an absolute legend and gentleman, Mr. Alan Watts. Alan, thanks so much for taking the time to join the show here, and especially for just being so cool and giving me one of the most memorable times I've ever spent on rock with those couple days out at Smith Rock. Hey, if you guys are heading out to Smith Rock, look up Alan. Maybe he'll meet you out there. He's usually out there. You'll probably see him hanging out at one of the cliffs, but I actually think he does some occasional guiding as well. So hell, look into that. You might be able to have Alan go out and show you up one of those classic routes. And speaking of showing people around classic routes, the bonus episode that I got here with Alan goes into an incredible time that he spent with Adam Ondra out at Smith Rock, where Adam Ondra, rightfully so, got a little starstruck being with Alan Watts. But then it was all about Adam's incredible attempt at flashing Just Do It, the 14C, the hardest route in the country at the time, the first 14C in the country that Jibe Tribout did not steal from Alan, as it turns out, which I learned in this conversation here. But man, can Adam Ondra come in and flash that route? Well, Alan was there. He's got the behind-the-scenes take on it, along with some other really cool stories from his time with Adam, and also the future of hard climbing at Smith. It's really a fantastic and delightful bonus episode. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost, actually, with a free trial over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show, or right there in your Apple Podcast player if you are an iPhone person. And you're also going to get instant access to more than 100 hours of other bonus content featuring the best of the best. I'm talking about Adam Ondra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, Magnus Mitbo, and so many more athletes and coaches that have been on the show here. Plus, pro clinics on stronger fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, advanced bouldering with Allison Vest, moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, performance hacks with Hazel Finley, and so many more. It's all there for just a few bucks a month, or actually zero cost right now with that free trial, so you can try it before you buy it. Although, honestly, your support as patrons and subscribers is really what helps to keep this thing going. So if you got a few bucks, I certainly would appreciate your help as I'm jamming away here in the podcast/utility closet. Thank you. I love you. Hey, did you know that The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Well, you do now, and it feels pretty good for me to write that check every month. They're doing such amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. Y'all can get inspired and learn more about their amazing work over at honnoldfoundation.org, and toss them some love if you can. They're doing awesome stuff. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. The show is produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by the wonderful Glenn Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. If you want to do something that helps me out for zero cost, you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, or just share this with one of your climbing friends or the gym that you climb at. It really helps to get the word out there. I appreciate it. I hope your training and climbing are going great, and if you are struggling like me, well, just remember the struggle makes us stronger.